Hello there. Let me talk a little bit about what we're going to do here. I'm going to be telling you about what happened in Holland. Basically, Frank has already said we've ran a little bit of a campaign over the past half year. We've only been at it since July, publicly, a couple months in preparation. I will detail basically, first I'll talk a little bit about black box voting, why it's bad. I don't think I need to spend more than one slide, and I don't think I have more than one slide on that. There will be lots of discussion, probably. There will be people disagreeing. There will be people thinking they have a better system which does work. But we can do that afterwards. It's much more fun to do that in the discussion. Overall, I'll be clicking through the slides rather quickly, because that's what I really am mostly here for, is discussion and trying to set things up and trying to work out what we're going to do next. It's a little bit of a big crowd, but I really like to strategize, really like to sort of get together and figure out what we're going to do. First, I'm going to describe a little bit the situation we found. Then I'm going to be talking about what we did, sort of the events in Holland of 2006, the methods we used, the things we learned, sort of go in between the timeline, but it's rather chronologic. And then I'll talk a little bit about what sort of random thoughts about what we've learned afterwards, sort of reflect on what to other campaigns, to other countries, and possibly see where we go from there. And also try to actively get you to do stuff. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do, share what we've learned. We've had a very, very large amount of fun. In fact, I've had more fun over the past 6 months than I've probably had in the years before. And hopefully, I can motivate some of you to spend some time doing activism, whatever activism, changing the world, because it can be so much fun. Especially if you're doing it with a little bit of humor, and if you're doing it in a way that you can actually win. And I'm going to go through a lot of the things we've learned, also, hopefully, turning some of you into anti-black box voting activists, if you aren't already, in your Bundesland or in your nation state or wherever you're at. This is a formal definition of black box voting: any voting system in which the mechanisms for recording and/or tabulating the vote are hidden from the voter, and/or the mechanism lacks a tangible record of the vote cast. I think Ulrich has already been through this. Who here has been to Ulrich's talk? Yeah, okay, not even half. Okay, then I should get into it a little bit. There is a class of voting machines out there, like the one that's standing here, the same one that is in use, or a very minorly modified version that is in use in large parts of Germany. And that voting machine does not keep any record of the vote other than a software count. And we think that's bad for a number of reasons, mostly because you trust a whole chain of people and organizations with the count of that vote. The manufacturer, whoever stored the machine, whoever has once held the machine, a host of parties dealing with the machine. I'll talk a little bit about how we got here and how I got to care about this issue and how a lot of other people got to care about this issue. And one of the main points is the USA, is the dirty elections there. Now, USA elections have always been dirty. I wasn't so much informed of this. I knew the popular culture aspects of it, the Chicago elections. But US elections have always been very dirty. Voter suppression, meaning making sure that your adversaries' people can't get to the polling stations. Most widely known because in the US there's huge lines for sort of the urban black population that wants to vote, because there's only one voting machine or 10 voting machines for 1 million people. And then in the richer white suburbs, there's like one voting machine per person almost. And a lot of this happens, and they redo the lines of the districts to make sure that whoever is in power stays in power. So there's very dirty elections in the US, and these dirty elections have been there long before voting machine technology. But we've all seen the 2000 Florida election, the lot of brouhaha about paper cards and figuring out where the punch went. And as a reaction to that, the US Congress passed the Helping America Vote Act, or HAVA. And what HAVA did is designate about $3.5 billion for all the states and all the counties, because voting is organized on a county level, for all the counties to basically buy voting machines. And to buy them so quickly, I think all orders had to be signed by summer 2007, I think. So buying them so quickly that nobody had a chance to look at this technology, nobody could ask any questions, and the money was free for the counties anyway. So basically all of America now bought voting machines, or a lot of America now bought voting machines. Then there's the whole controversy. There's organizations in America, the most well-known is black box voting, but there's a whole host of organizations in America that deal with voting machine technology. Then there was the 2004 Bush-Kerry race, which saw a lot of irregularities in Ohio, in Florida. And in 2006, but of course, this was after our campaign, there was the Florida 13, the district where thousands and thousands of votes, I think 18,000 votes were lost because of a voting machine error, quote unquote. Then there's also Ireland, which is important in Holland because Ireland bought 50 million euros worth of Dutch voting equipment and then studied it and decided never to use it. So those 50 million euros worth of machines, we personally think the kickbacks were already paid. So, but these 50 million euros worth of machines are sitting in some army barracks in Ireland, probably never to be used. There are some in government that still claim, yes, we're going to be using them next year, really. But there's an Irish campaign very much like ours called the Irish Citizens for Trustworthy E-Voting. And they've done a really good job of pointing out where the flaws are, where the logical errors are in trusting one of these machines in keeping the count, and why that system is much worse than anything they've had before. And the Irish, mind you, have a hellishly complex counting system where everybody casts 3 votes and the votes have an order, so you vote for the first preference, then the second, then the third, and then the counting is done in multiple rounds, and if you don't get past a certain hurdle in the first count, then everything's recounted and reshuffled and restacked. So they have a hugely complicated system. In 2004, I remember reading the technical reports on the Nedap machine and learning about my own country's voting system more than I had ever been able to find out, because I had tried a little bit, more than I had ever been able to find out by asking Nedap, the manufacturers, or by asking TNO, the Dutch institution that tests these machines, that certifies them. And the Irish reports also explicitly mentioned, well, listen, anybody can just change the EEPROMs in this thing, can just change the software, and then it would run any software you want. In Holland, elections are very simple. I'll paint a little bit the Dutch sort of landscape. Elections are very simple. There's only 1 vote per election, no citizen initiatives, very few referenda, never many elections. Here's a list of some of the actors. There's the Ministry of the Interior. It's a little bit of a complicated situation that I won't bother you with too much, but there's actually 2 ministers at the Ministry of the Interior, and one is the Minister for Government Renewal and Colonies, although we're not calling them colonies anymore. So that's the responsible minister, but it's the Ministry of the Interior. Then there's Kiesraad, a little bit like the German Bundeswahlleiter. And they do publish the results for national elections, but they don't actually organize the election. The Ministry of the Interior does, so it's a little bit of a different structure. Then there's Brightside, formerly called TNO-ITSEF, before that called TNO, which is the testing institute. Just a regular commercial company. There's no state involvement whatsoever. And then there's the voting machine manufacturers, in our case Nedap and SDU. And of course, the elections themselves are organized by the municipalities. So the government can provide guidelines and legislation, but the actual responsibility for the vote is with the municipalities. Then there's a bunch of legislation. There's the Constitution, which says basically elections have to be fair and honest, and they have to be by secret ballot and proportional representation. but don't go into details. There's the election law, a little bit like the German situation. Then there's the election order. The election law basically has just one or two paragraphs which say that you can also do it differently, and in that case, everything that applies to pieces of paper doesn't apply anymore. But then the minister must make an order for that to be legal, and then that order is the election order, and underneath that is the approval regulations, which the minister can just change at the stroke of a pen, and that the approval regulations, that's where it says what the voting machine should be. Very, very similar to the German situation. Company formerly known as TNO, and TNO itself now called Brightside. And that testing doesn't happen at the order of government. It happens at the order of the companies that want to be certified to have their machine ready for the Dutch market. So this company doesn't have a client relation at all with the government. They have no responsibility towards the government. Their only responsibility is towards the voting machine company. They have to certify that it matches the regulations. Now, these regulations say everything about environmental factors. How much shock should it resist? Vibration. You must be able to spill a glass of water on it and it should still function. It should never shock you electrically. It can shock you in many other ways, but not electrically. The buttons have to be of a certain size and readability. There's all sorts of user interface specifications in those regulations. But the entire concept of somebody trying to steal votes doesn't appear. Computer security doesn't appear. That whole concept is absent, as if nobody would ever want that. So protection against whatever manipulation is left up to the manufacturers. As I said, there's two manufacturers. There's Nedap. And they've made a couple of machines. The ES3A is still in use in some places. It's a slightly older version of this. ES3B, and then there's a new version of this, which I'll get into in a moment as we do the Nedap machines in more detail. But the newer machine is still a 68,000 based machine. It just uses surface mount parts because they couldn't get the through holes anymore. It's still the same machine that they built years and years ago. And then there's SDU. We'll get into a lot more Nedap further on, don't worry. SDU makes a machine that looks like this. It's actually an embedded Windows machine, as you'll soon see. They used to make something called the STEM PC. STEM is our word for vote or Wahl. A STEM PC is a regular PC with a touchscreen that was put up by the municipalities, and they had software licenses for a software package called RS Vote, which dealt with the touchscreen and was just a Windows program that counted the votes. And now they've basically taken that RS Vote program, which was once built by Alcatel Belgium and then sold, and it's a piece of crap, everybody says. But that was then put in a box with an embedded motherboard, embedded PC, and that box is now called NuVote. Now, NuVote is special because you can't buy a NuVote. You buy an election. No. What happens is the election is completely outsourced. The computers are owned by SDU. SDU trains your poll workers, the people in the polling stations. And SDU basically tells the city what the outcome was in the evening. So, and in the case of regional governments within cities, they wanted these governments because they couldn't install the software on all these different precincts, because there was all these different problems with, so they figured, why don't we just install Citrix and then these people can look at the results on our servers. So basically, this is completely outsourced. There's minimal involvement, if any, by city officials. So it's really, really easy if you're a city official. You just call SDU. Now, SDU is our former state printing press. It's a little bit like the verselbstständigte Bundesdruckerei. And they got into this business because they used to make all the forms used for elections. So they used to really, as their publishing business, they used to print stuff for elections. That's how they got here. As I said, it's Windows PC running Windows XP, and it has a built-in GPRS wireless modem, of course. Mind you that there's absolutely no specifications regarding security, none whatsoever. You could legally have a Windows 95 box with the first version of Internet Explorer and an open ADSL line with no NAT, and that would still be a legal voting machine as long as the buttons were a certain size and it resists vibration. And now the Dutch environment comes with a lot of e-voting is perfectly safe, just trust us. And the Ministry of the Interior in 2004, in response to this Irish thing, said, in contrast to elections using paper ballots, the count of an electronic election cannot possibly be wrong, so there's never a need for a recount. And then he also said, oh, but the Irish situation is so different, and the software is specially made for Ireland. It's not even comparable to the Dutch machines, even though they're based on the same technology. So all of these Irish security problems that you've read about, they don't really apply here. No need to worry. Another disturbing thing that's happening in Holland, or that was already happening before we started getting involved, is internet voting. In Holland, we have a sort of another structure of government. We have the municipalities, the provinces, and the national government, and then, of course, the European Parliament elections. But we have a completely different body called the Waterschap. And those are the governmental bodies that deal with dikes and pumping the water out. And those are actually the oldest democratic structures in Holland. And supposedly they're the reason that Dutch governments until now have been fairly stable, is because we needed governments to be fairly stable, and we needed governments to take decisions that would only benefit us 20 or 30 years from now, because otherwise we'd get wet feet. So they've built a system called RIES, R-I-E-S, and that's an internet voting system. It's actually kind of neat, because everybody gets a DES key, and everybody gets to vote. Everybody gets to vote, and then afterwards they publish a file, and everybody can use their receipt that they got, their cryptographic receipt. It's all generated on your own computer using JavaScript. But the cryptographic receipt that you got from the server can then be used to verify that your vote is counted correctly. And they've calculated all the hashes for all the possible votes that you could do before giving you that DES key. Elections as sort of an alternative to polling stations. For a while they would say, yeah, you can still go to the polling station, but they would use RIES as an alternative way to cast your vote. Now, for me, that's a definite no-no, and for a lot of people around me, that was a definite no-no, because you want to see under which circumstances people vote. If you don't, any power relationship, any control relationship in society will be abused. The standard example is husbands and wives, especially from macho cultures, but there's lots of other examples. There's student unions or student clubs, or any employer-employee. Any relationship in society can be abused in the sense of, hey, let's go vote together. Ah, really? So you want to monitor the circumstances under which a vote is cast, and it's really to me, it was heartbreaking to see people of the Ministry of the Interior sort of trying to negotiate away that point. Yeah, but that's sort of important, but other things are also important. The secrecy of the ballot is not protected enough in this particular case, because the DES keys are then sent to you as something you can enter. So I think it was converted to ASCII without the zeros and the I's and the... So converted to some typable form and then put in some security, printed inside of a security envelope and sent to you. So somebody, of course, has to have all this data to be able to send you that key. Now that somebody is, they didn't disclose who it was, but it's probably SDU, because they have a lot of experience with security printing. And so at one of the technical gatherings where they explained this system, I had to ask them, so let me get this right. You're giving somebody the keys that they can use to calculate what everybody else has voted. Because with that key, you can calculate all the possible votes, and thus see what that person has voted with that control file that they post at the end of each election. And you're giving that to a printing press where everybody has security clearances, meaning hundreds of people there depend for their livelihood on the intelligence community. That's interesting. And then there's even though they have published some of the software really late, like a day before the election, because they weren't done yet. Scary, huh? But they have used it this year as a replacement for the postal ballot, which is also a terribly insecure system which doesn't have secrecy of the ballot protected well enough. So as a replacement for the postal ballot, they've used it this year, figuring there wasn't much criticism because the other system was pretty cooked also. But that was also happening before we started. And then, as Frank said, last year we did our talk. And we basically said that because we lost the privacy war, it's become ever more important to hang on to democracy, because you cannot ever let it slip anymore. Because you've basically lost any method of regaining it, clandestinely in any case. And because all of us could use a conflict we could win. And then also some of us got to vote on the SDU New Vote machine. I personally, in March, for the municipal elections this year, I was first confronted with this machine, and I pressed this button, and it was just the eerie feeling. All of Holland has been e-voting forever and ever. I think 60% of the country was already e-voting in 1990. So Holland is pretty much 100% e-voting, and Amsterdam was the last major city to not have it. And then they switched and they bought SDU New Vote, or they hired SDU New Vote to do the election, and that was sort of the last straw for a number of us. I remember Barry, who you all know from his lockpicking things, and myself, both independently from each other, being fumingly mad at the polling station and being faced by people that didn't understand. Yeah, but they're tested, don't worry, it's all good. And in fact, he was even told at his polling station, well, if you don't trust it, then why don't you just not vote? Goodbye, sir. And then a lot of strategy also formed before and during Datenspuren in Dresden, the conference where a lot of people that I know from Germany met, and we sort of talked about, we can't let this happen, we must do something. So Barry and myself basically initiated a campaign in the Netherlands called Wij vertrouwen stemcomputers niet. Don't try to pronounce that. It means we don't trust voting computers. And it has been very successful despite the hideously ugly domain name that you see over there. Okay, our campaign strategy has been to go easy. The Dutch public is 99% e-voting. So we didn't want to say we must go back to paper, so instead we said we must have a trustworthy system, be it paper or be it something with voter-verified viable paper audit trail, meaning tickets that you can actually see and then put in the voting container. But we must have something that is trustworthy. Germany is different, of course, because the large-scale rollout hasn't happened. We have 10,000 machines for 17 million people, covering the entire country, basically. And Germany has less than 2,000 machines, I think, for a much bigger country. And we completely skipped the issue of internet voting because not many people knew about it. There hadn't been huge press. And there wasn't any time to do the research right. An interesting aspect is we call them voting computers. Whereas legislation and Nedap and government, everybody called them voting machines. We figured it was really much easier for people to understand that this was a computer if we called it a computer. It's not a machine. A machine is like a washing machine or a typing machine. You open it up and you see what it's doing. You see the little lever that goes between the key that says A and the hammer that puts the A on the paper. Here, this is a box that just runs software, and it could run any software, and you have no means, without actually taking out the software and disassembling it, you have no means of seeing what that software does. We gambled that we could dictate what it would be called, and it's worked. Meaning, right now, mainstream media almost never uses voting machine anymore. It's always voting computer. We'll see why that is later. I started doing a lot of research in May. We still were like 4 or 5 people. There was a very small group. There wasn't any really well-formed strategy, but I figured I would start doing research, and I knew a person that could do FOIA requests. I'll get to that later. Informationsvrijheidsgesetz, with us it's called WOB. But I started doing research. I started figuring out how it really worked. And you'd wonder why, because we already knew that it was bad. Gut instincts told us that we were completely insecure. We felt that it was plain wrong. And the everything is fine facade didn't have too much in the way of building behind it. But of course, you need facts. You can't convince people if you don't know precisely what's wrong, if you don't know, if you can be beaten on facts. If anybody from the Interior Ministry or anybody from one of the manufacturers, from Nedap, can say, well, but you didn't know that in 98 Parliament already passed such a thing and we've already dealt with that. So you must know it all. And if you can't prove it, if you can't show the dead body, then there has been no murder. We've gotten to a point where we've been right on so many occasions, and we've said so many things that have proven to be true, that by now the entire Dutch press trusts us on this issue and completely distrusts Nedap, the Interior Ministry, and everybody else involved. And a lot of that is very hard work by a large group of people. There's like 10 of us updating the website, putting new news articles on, updating parliamentary documents we can find, really making sure that everything we say is actually backed by facts and is true. I talked a little bit about freedom of information legislation. We call it WOB, you call it IFG here in Germany. It's probably called differently in all sorts of other European countries. Get to know that legislation. No matter what you're doing, if you ever want to find out what your government is doing, use that legislation to its maximum potential, because it's incredibly powerful. It's like casting the demon spell. It's like you see them, the 27B/6, you see them freeze in place, and oh my God, we have to give them all the documents. We used it extensively. The German law is slightly more limited. It's especially more costly. But apparently it's only more costly if you then in the end decide to actually get the documents. So there's all sorts of ways around it, I hear, but that's something you definitely need to be up to date on. This is some of the questions that you can ask. Well, I'm glad that's actually readable. All the documents needed to create another document, or other documents we need to create an overview. So there's certain phrases that you use to make sure that you get the broad palette of documents. We write our current Freedom of Information requests are like 5 pages, 4 or 5 pages of small print. And you have to be slightly careful with this because you are causing a lot of work and it can make you a lot of enemies. I've actually learned since doing my first FOIA requests that with a day of writing a Freedom of Information request, within 1 day, from sitting down wanting to write it, to actually bringing it to the post office to get it sent there as registered mail, with that 1 day you can cause 3 months of work at whatever bureaucracy you're sending that to. So it's asymmetric warfare to the max. But I've also since learned that there's a huge crowd of people that do this all the time. Which I'm not sure I approve of. I think that what we're doing is really important, and I do this because I think it's really important. And there's lots of people, I found out that there's people, not lots of people, but there's a few people out there that just do this because they're annoyed with some part of government, which I'm not sure I would advocate, because we don't want to lose that legislation to trolling. It's really important legislation. It tells us what our government is doing, and that's a privilege that we should use wisely, I think. All the documents that shed light on the exact logistics of getting machines to and from polling stations. So you can actually make your government tell you, well, who do you hire for security, and where do you store them, and what do you do, and what's the brand of the alarm system. As you can see, documents dealing with the last, these are just some example questions. The fourth one is really interesting because it's all documents and correspondence which was created as a result of my previous request. Emails and documents. Of course, there's headers that say documents can also be emails and formal requests and quotes and anything, anything on paper or on disk or on any carrier information. And you can also ask secondary questions. If you don't get documents, you can also still get the meta information. So use this legislation. We put it all on the net. I'll show you some of that later if we still have time afterwards. But we basically put everything on the net. Make sure you delete their telephone numbers. We didn't do that in the beginning, and it caused them a lot of grief because all sorts of people started calling the contact lawyer or the contact civil servant that handled our FOIA requests, which is not something you want because you need those people to service your request and to talk to you and to talk logistics about your request with you. But we basically have the whole correspondence, from sending the letter to asking why they haven't sent you anything yet, to them responding, well, it's a lot of work, to sort of the whole logistics of getting you the documents. And we also found that our website was a really good place to put them, so we didn't lose them. Then in, I think, end of June, we learned that our government had fallen and that the elections were actually 6 months early. We had our whole campaign. Basically, we started we seriously started working in May, June, and we were figuring we would sort of peak towards May. There would be provincial elections in March. There still are. This coming March, there's provincial elections. And then the big one would be the parliamentary election, the national parliament elections in May. Now, these parliamentary elections happened in November, so we had to do a lot of things early. They had to do a lot of things early as well, so they were very busy as well, which has helped us in many cases. And there was an election scandal in a small town, which posed an opportunity for us to get some publicity much earlier than we thought we would be able to otherwise. But I'll get to that later. So we needed a website and a logo, and Antenna designed this really great logo for us. In Holland, we vote with a red pencil. It's not a ballpoint, it's just a red pencil. And we felt this was really powerful. And we launched this website. Now, those of you in the know recognize the little character up there in the right. And yes, it is actually a media wiki. We loved the MediaWiki technology because our campaign was just too fast for anything else. There was just so much happening, and we figured there would be so much vandalism because it would be in the press all the time, and there was almost none. We did have CAPTCHAs, because otherwise it would be all about Viagra and all other link spam. But it's definitely, any political campaign should have their website as a wiki. But we liked the fact that it had a skin to make it look like a regular website, so it wasn't so wiki-ish. And it's also great to find new people that do stuff, because you actually find new people that are working on your website that you didn't know before and that are doing great stuff, and you end up inviting them and working with them. Very early on, we also decided that we needed to explain what we were about and explain this weird notion of voting machines, as everybody knew them, not being trustworthy. So we built a comic strip. This is with the German text, and this is actually it's much longer, this is a quarter of it, but this is the magic vote black box 2 machine that has a person inside that grabs your ballot paper and then shreds it and keeps a count on a piece of paper inside. Which we use to sort of drive home to people, look, this is what it's about, this is what the problem is. I need to drink a little bit of water. Hang on. Or I'll dry out. Good stuff. So yeah, we had, during the March elections, the ones where I was voting on this STU new vote machine, there's a municipality in Holland called Landert. And in Landert they had an election, And a gentleman by the name of Guus de Meerman was a village alderman. And he was up for re-election, and he was also a poll worker operating one of these machines, the Nedap. And he rearranged the polling station so that everybody would be sitting with their back towards him, because they could then do the paper thing. You know, are you eligible to vote? And then they would send the voter to him, and then he would press the button. And this was a home for the elderly, and he got 180 votes in that station, and he got 7 in all the other stations in that municipality. And both Nedap and NFI is our forensics people, looked at that machine. And the funny thing is they looked at it in that order. So Nedap could have done anything to that machine before the NFI got it. And they could find nothing wrong with the machine. And the police investigation is now complete, and they're charging him with election fraud. And the current theory as to what happened is that the elderly people never pressed, or most of the elderly people never pressed the red vote button. So they just pressed their candidate, and then he would go in and press himself and hit vote. So there was no major technology thing involved. It was just a human fraud more than anything. So Nedap said, well, that's such a breach of procedure. If you get 2 people out of the 3 not to watch what you're doing during a vote, then you can also rig a paper vote. You can just replace the ballots. You can just take the paper out of people's hands and get rid of it. But then you would still need to get rid of that paper. And the thing is also that people understand how a paper vote works, and they understand what its security depends on. They understand how it can fail. So if you say, well, I'll just take that piece of paper and I'll put it in the ballot box later, people understand, hey, wait a second. Whereas with an electronic system, it's much harder to understand, at least for people that are not into figuring out what electronic systems security depends on. It's much harder to figure out in which ways the security can fail. Okay, so now we existed, we had the website, we were making our point, and we were making it with some facts behind it. It wasn't just voting machines can't be trusted, it was voting machines can't be trusted because the regulation doesn't say anything about this, and because... so we made our point, but we had a lot of facts to back it up. And we were kind of disheartened to find that the first reactions we got were from crazy people. I've always known that. The aliens are controlling everything, and they're also controlling voting machines. If you do something like this, you find out how many paranoid people there are in the world, and there are quite a few. And any paranoid person that believes government has fallen into the hands of aliens must explain how people keep voting for governments and how things happen. And manipulated voting machines make total sense. They'll believe anything you say, but they'll also believe that vapor trails behind airliners are part of a government plot. So they're pretty useless. We also got a mail from the ministry really early. And they said basically in a slightly longer email, but this is the gist of it. Dear Mr. Gonggrijp, we're taking it very seriously. Oh my God, let's come talk, and maybe you can help us raise public confidence in e-voting. To which I replied, well, it sounds like we are the problem and not e-voting. And if you just retract some of these statements, like it can never be wrong, so it doesn't ever need a recount, then we can both bury it properly and we can get rid of it. And right now, increasing the level of confidence is not in our nor in the country's best interest. To which there was never any reply. And then Jan Groenendaal, who is the maker of that machine and the software that sits behind it, also reacted. He puts PDF documents on his website every once in a while when he feels bad about something. It's sort of his way of doing a weblog. And now read this text. I'm not going to read it to you. Read this text and let it roll over your tongue. Sort of taste the words, especially that middle sentence. So this is their view of computer security. By that time, we were getting results from the Freedom of Information requests that we did. And the first results we got were from Amsterdam, where there's ever only been one e-vote, the March 2006 local elections. And we basically found evidence that the election was completely outsourced. Most of the things that I just told you about SDU NuVote, we learned from the documents we got through the Freedom of Information request. To what extent? Also, elections had become much more expensive. We used to pay $1.6 million per vote, and now it's 2.7, and they didn't buy any equipment for that 1 million difference. It was just service. Then they also gave us a lot of documents that had that they didn't have to give us, that were copyrighted by SDU, some by Nedap, because they had also given us both the bids for the tender that they had put out, and they had given us a lot of documents that basically had non-disclosure agreements as part of the document, making them liable for all sorts of mayhem if they were ever disclosed. So all of which are perfectly legal grounds for refusing a Freedom of Information request, but they still gave them to us. And then we put them online, and then they called saying, oh, SDU is a little mad, can you please take it back off? To which we said, which part of publication don't you understand? Also, we said, well, okay, well, how about this? Have SDU, their lawyers, contact us. So this lawyer from SDU, a very expensive firm, contacts me by email, asking forwarded that email straight to the press. Which created one of the first media hypes that we created. Basically circling through all the press in the country had the story that SDU wanted documents removed from the website, secret documents. It got crazier every time, every new article. Somebody wrote that we had published the software, and insane, but really good. And it really helped us to publicize the other 2 points, which was that the election was outsourced, and that it was €1 million more expensive, which people didn't realize. You have to realize people think that this computerization of the elections is happening because it's much cheaper and more efficient. Once you drive home that it's actually more expensive, people go, but then why are we doing it? Then there was also the Freedom of Information findings from the ministry, where we found that nobody has any clue how the equipment works. Nobody knows. Nowhere in government. They depend on software that is written by a man who's about to retire, and they don't know what to do. Even the Kiesraad, which is the Bundeswahlleiter, wrote documents to the minister in panic saying, what is the country going to do when this guy retires and nobody wants to make the software anymore? It's a bit of a crazy niche business, writing election software. And we also noticed that lots of people write the ministry always said, well, there's never been any criticism, or it's always been non-controversial. Holland has always been the example country. It's completely non-controversial. E-voting is nobody really mistrusts it. And we found that lots of people actually did and wrote letters because we asked for those letters and any answers to them. Lots of people did, and lots of people got very reassuring answers. Well, they were all tested, and it must be secure because this institute was testing the security, which of course wasn't true. During this month in August, we also become legit. We get our own office, we set up a foundation, we do some fundraising, and we get a paid staffer for a few months. So we can actually campaign full bore. We can actually go at it and make sure that we can handle whatever they throw at us. Because there's a lot of media campaign going to happen, and most of that is because we get one of these. Now, the most interesting thing about this is the type plate, which you see on the right front there. Because until now, everybody had called it stemmachine, Wahlmaschine. And we were very heartened to find that they actually called it stemcomputer as well. Now, this was at a time that they already knew that we were up to something. I have a history in this country, in Holland, and they know a little bit. They knew where this was headed. Let's put it that way. So they, like crazy, they tried to make sure that we wouldn't get hold of a Nedap. They actually sent letters to all the communities, a little bit too late, to governments, asking them to be very careful with their Nedaps, never to sell them to anybody, never to lend them to anybody. And then Barry manages to buy 2 Nedaps. We lent one from one community, and then we bought 2 more. This is one of the 2 machines we bought for 3,000 euros. And then we got all the accessories to go with it, meaning the voting memory modules and the box to read the memory. You'll see that in a movie clip later. For $3,000 in a cake. And the cake was for the cake. It was I think it was whipped cream pie. But the cake was actually for all the accessories, because she wasn't sure what to charge for that, because she wasn't sure what it was worth. And Barry said, "Well, if I throw in a really big cake, is that okay?" Well, I guess. Now, how we found this Nedap is by going through a list of all the municipalities that had merged. Because usually if municipalities merge, and I'm sure there's a lot of that happening in Germany as well, they have leftover accessories because they only need 1 set, and they may even have leftover Nedaps because they've lowered the number of districts or regions. So yeah, that's what happened. Basically, what we told this community that we were buying them from is that our company was going to do workers' collective elections. And that as a large company, we would need to sort of multiple locations. You know, we would need these devices. And they were very glad to get rid of them because they were written off, and any money was just extra money. So we were doing these worker elections, and then once we got them, we figured out that, yes, we were only 6 people. Maybe we don't need to do elections yet on a machine. So we sold them to the foundation. So we spent the month after getting the machine, hacking the machine, reverse engineering it in any possible way. And before I get into that, there's something to be said about that. We tried to convey this as often as we could, and we even succeeded on quite a few occasions. But this isn't about computer security. It's not about whether some crazy crowd of 500 ninja fighters that breaks into government buildings can manipulate the vote. It's about whether we want to replace verifiability by blind trust in a system that we can't audit. But actually being able to prove that it could be manipulated got us the press to get that message across. There's a lot of stuff we did, and a lot of stuff about the hack is also in some of the movies I'm going to show you. So I'm just clicking through them really quickly, and there's also a lot of it on the web. A lot of you probably have already seen some of the documents or have read some of the web coverage about it. There's a report that gives you all the technical detail that I'm skipping right now. Just because I figured a lot of people would have read it already. But this is the key that needs to be kept in the safe when there's no election. That's actually the standing instruction for municipalities. As soon as the election is over, these keys go back into the municipal safe. If this was on your mailbox downstairs in your apartment building, you would complain to whoever rents you the apartment. And after every vote, the chairman of the commission puts it in a sealed envelope as sort of a magic gesture, ceremonial, putting it in the sealed envelope. I'm going to be clicking through a lot of things here. Basically, this is what we found when we opened the box. When we unscrewed it, we found a motherboard. You'll see some footage of it later. We found a motherboard with a 68,000 processor, a really 68,000, not a 6820, nothing modern, just a really, really old 68,000. With the 40x4 LCD screen and the foil keyboard that you see in front of you. Oh, I can walk. Gee, I'm free. Underneath this piece of paper, which is covered by plastic, is actually 36 by 30 foil switches. So all the candidate names are printed on a piece of paper, which you order from the printing company. You don't do that yourself for local elections. And then the candidate names are printed on here, and then you press a candidate, it shows the name of the candidate, and then you press vote. And then it registers the vote both on one of these modules. I'll show them in some close-up later as well. Basically, just a little circuit board with 2 flash chips on them. And at the end of the day, it also prints out the results on a little thermal cash register printer, which you both see there, the 2 times 128 kilobyte flash and the cash register printer. For the operator, there's also a little console. This is what the poll workers press every time somebody gets to vote. They press this button. And if there's 2 elections, this device can handle up to 2 elections. They have 2 buttons. Like, for instance, you may be eligible to vote for local elections because you're a foreigner resident, but you may be not eligible to vote for parliament, in which case they will not press the second button. So, and there's a key. This is the famous high security key. And that's... And the document that comes out, the printout that comes out, actually has the status of a legal document. It's the proces verbaal. It's the Dutch legal document that describes the outcome of the election, and it's actually signed by all the poll workers. Everything between these components is 74 series glue logic. There's no PALs for those of you into electronics. This is like the most bland, standard, vintage processor board that you could find. It's 1980s technology. It was probably designed, or predecessors of it were designed in the early 80s. And this particular version is from the late 80s. And then later versions of this device with minor modifications were also sold in all other European countries. So for instance, the German machine, the ESD1, is this Nedap, but with a slightly different box for the Wahlhelfer. Because in Germany, some polling stations are designated to get Wahlstatistik. So they actually get, they do statistic on sex and age group of the people coming to vote, and they have to press different buttons for the voters so that they can do statistics. And they incorporated that by putting more buttons on that little box, and they fixed some other things. And then another version of that device was then sold to France, where I think they replaced the EEPROMs in it by flash. So you can actually by inserting a cartridge, you can change the ROM, which is real handy. And then a newer version of that then came back to Holland and is now the other machine that I just showed you, the ESN1, SSN1. So there's multiple iterations of it, but it's still the same 68,000-based system. They had to make changes reluctantly, basically because the only places they could get their parts was in electronics antique shops. They were running out of EEPROMs, they were running out of through-hole components for a lot of that board, so they had to make new revisions basically as soon as the antique prices went up. So first we had to figure out a memory map. I'm sure you can't read this, or sort of. Part of this is reverse engineering from the board, and part of it is looking at the code, which I'll get into next, but basically figuring out where each line on that system went, figuring out what everything was. With IDA, you could actually disassemble the code, and then everything you see here, like read candidate info, that's of course meaning that wasn't there. That's meaning that we had to apply. And this is a tiny, tiny fraction. 256 kilobytes, which is what's in there. Only half of it is full, but that's still a lot of code if you have to go through it. Fortunately, we had some people that are very, very, very good at that. Jan Groenendaal said much, much, much earlier in the discussion, as he just became aware of our campaign, one of the claims we had made is, look, it's just a computer. And sort of to support that claim, we said, well, it can be programmed to honestly count the elections, to honestly count the votes, but it can also just as easily be programmed to dishonestly count the votes. Or it could be programmed to play chess. And then as a reaction in one of his PDF documents, Jan Groenendaal wrote, nah, can't do that. So, of course, this was our main challenge when we understood the machine. Now, it was a good test to see if we understood if we understood all the input-output. It was a good test to see if we really knew the machine well enough to start messing with the software that was already on there. But unfortunately, the machine only had 16 kilobytes of RAM. So we found a tiny old-style chess program that just fit, and we had to squeeze off a lot of tables. So its chess is pretty atrocious. But it knows all the rules, it knows en passant, it can do everything, but it's not a very strong player as a result of the 16 kilobyte limit. I'll show you some of that later because there's a little movie. But then we felt more confident and we felt that we could actually mess with their software. And we called our software Nedap Power Fraud. And this is because they actually market their systems as Nedap Power Vote in English-speaking countries, or at least in England and in Ireland. So we figured Power Fraud was a fitting name. It's vote-stealing software that is very clever about when not to steal. Meaning, basically what we did is there's a little bit of EEPROM in there that stores settings, and it also stores an error log and an event log, which are really useless because it doesn't have a real-time clock. But there's some memory in there that we could use, and we actually shortened one of the logs so that we had 500 bytes left over. And in those 500 bytes, we put the 16-bit integers, how many votes we stole from which party. And we only stole if people voted for the number 1 of a party, which is what most people do. So we stole the votes, but we stuck them in a special place because we couldn't stick them on the module because we couldn't erase the module. Because the module can only be erased in the special box that they use to read the modules at the City Hall. So we couldn't write to that module, which was their idea of security. It was really implemented in a funny way. If you want to see how that was done, read the documentation because it's really interesting. So we couldn't read them. We couldn't write them to the blue module because we couldn't erase it. We couldn't take it back off again. So what we did instead is we stuck it in the settings ROM. And then at the end of the vote, when people closed the totals, when people said, okay, voting is over now, with the little key and then pressing some buttons, then we said, okay, let's now figure out if this was a real election. So if the election only lasted 2 hours, then it wasn't a real election. So we write back all those votes to the parties that they were supposed to go to. So if somebody does a little test election, if somebody only issues 50 votes, that wasn't a real election. So we write it all back to the party that we're supposed to go to. So any testing you do doesn't show that it's a fraudulent device. And if you go, we didn't do this, but if you go as far as to do stats on the timings between when you press the release button, when the candidate is pressed, and when the vote button is pressed, now, there's almost no way that a human volunteer that is issuing, say, 1,500 votes over an 8 or 10 hour period or 12-hour period at random intervals is not going to show similarities in the way he times those keys. So then it becomes a job for a robot to figure out if the software in that machine is still honest. So in other words, we've built software, or we've concepted software with that last point, we've concepted software that we could say, look, you're never going to find out that this software is in there unless you put it through a real election, or you use a robot, or you just take out the EEPROMs, which by then, of course, was the easiest way. So in other words, you can never figure out if this thing defrauds you or not. And in a real election, if you only take 5%, you'll never know. What we also did is our software had a little string in there, like one of the parties that's currently on the board there. People that are interested can play with this machine after we're done, or we can put it somewhere else. I'm here for 2 more days. We can even put it in the Hack Center and make a real workbench out of it. basically, we wrote software that has a string in there, and if that string appears in the party name, then that becomes the recipient of the stolen votes, and you can also encode a percentage that you want to have. Like, I want 20% of all votes from, randomly from all votes. 20% go to this recipient party, so 20% more than the people that voted for it anyway. And it also said, oh yeah, we also had another one. We never steal from parties that only have a few votes. So if only one person votes, like the guy himself in a local election, you should never steal that, because then he knows that something's up. But we did it so that it had to match a string. Nedap and governments have always said, and German government is still saying that today, that there's no point in messing with these machines while they're in storage, because then you don't know which candidates are going to be under which button. Whereas the candidate lists travel to this machine on the blue module, and the minute it's started, it can figure out these buttons because it has the party name then, because it must display it. So that argument is completely false, and it has always been false. And German government is still making that argument that storage isn't tricky because you don't know which buttons go to which candidates. One other thing we did was we played a little bit with the radio emissions. This was mostly Frank's thing. We figured out that the display on these things radiates RF, and that on certain frequencies you can actually receive signals, and that these signals corresponded to what was being voted. Now, there's a number of really great graphs, but I don't want to go into everything about that. But basically what it meant is that the little display, the little LCD display that's on there, when it's displaying a special character, an accent, or an umlaut, it's the Japanese version of the display. So all the accents and all the umlauts are actually loaded as bitmaps to the display. When that happens, as soon as the display has to display at least one bitmap, the refresh frequency drops, because it has to do more work every time it draws the display, because it has to get data from RAM instead of just from ROM. Meaning that you could actually, at a distance, hear if there was an accent in there, and there's only one party in Holland that had an accent, which was the Christian Democrats. So you could actually build something that just by listening to a scanner, you could hear what party was being voted. There's a little movie on that later on. Then there's also a burst of data that you heard at the beginning as soon as the button is pressed, which we proved contains all the data needed to get the actual content of the display. We never did that because we need to match. It took a lot of digital signal processing that we didn't have time for. But we did have the images to prove that these bursts were really different, and that they were really the same for the same candidates and different for different candidates. And then there's the emissions from the display. Now, a lot of this was a really difficult point to get across. From the first municipality, we got this machine because some journalists helped us out. A very famous Dutch news broadcast, news documentary show. They basically gave us permission to use their name and to say we were them. And they went with us with a camera team to actually get the machine. Somebody had told them that it would probably make good television if we got one of these machines. So they helped us out. And that's what got us the machine. And after a month of hacking, we did this broadcast, and it actually has English subtitles. It's a little squeezed, but it has English subtitles. So I'm going to play. Do I have time? Yeah, I got time. I'm going to play all of it. It's 15 minutes worth of footage. So I'm just going to sit down. Oh, wait. Hang on. Oops. That's the credits. Now I need to. Sorry about that. I need to hook up the audio. Is there audio here? There must be. Other people played audio, so I get to play audio too. No. Yeah, but not into my computer.
Yeah. That's it.
Okay, no worries. Okay. No, it's not on yet. Okay, No worries. I don't... Are you sure it's on? No, it's not. There it is. There it is.
Goedenavond. Stemmen op een papieren formulier met een rood potloodje is hopeloos ouderwets. Maar het is een stuk veiliger dan stemmen met een computer. Fraude met stemcomputers blijkt een fluitje van een cent te zijn. De beveiliging van die dingen is zo lek als een mandje.
...22 november zijn er weer parlementsverkiezingen. Dan bepaalt u wie er in de Tweede Kamer komt. Bijna elke gemeente in Nederland gebruikt deze stemcomputer, de Nedap ES3B. Volgens de overheid is het apparaat betrouwbaar en veilig.
Dit is 100% betrouwbaar.
De machines die wij hier hebben staan, die hebben de TNO-goedkeuring. Dus we gaan ervan uit dat dat dan veilig is.
We hebben daar geen problemen mee gehad. Absoluut niet.
Je kunt niet frauderen.
Maar is de stemcomputer wel zo veilig en betrouwbaar? Als je gaat graven in het verkiezingsproces blijkt... de beveiliging van de stemcomputer is zo lek als een mandje. En fraude is een fluitje van een cent. We gaan dat stap voor stap bewijzen. In 90% van de Nederlandse
gemeente staat een stemcomputer van fabrikant Nedap Groenendaal. Maar het bedrijf houdt de software geheim uit angst voor concurrentie. Er zit niets anders op dan zelf een bemachtigen. We bellen met willekeurige
gemeente.
This is fine.
En al snel hebben we beet.
En wij zouden graag voor de uitzending 1 of 2 dagen zo'n machine ter beschikking hebben.
Ja.
Kan dat via jullie?
Dat moet geen probleem zijn.
Een dag later halen we hem op. Een stemcomputer met alle randapparatuur. Dat gaat wel heel erg makkelijk. Klaar om hem open te schroeven. Klaar voor uitgebreid onderzoek.
Niet in een grote stad zoals gebruikelijk, maar in het landelijke dorpje Vijfhuizen in de Haarlemmermeer hebben we ditmaal de verkiezingen gefilmd.
Tot de jaren 80 deden we het met potlood, papier en een melkbus.
Maar als het
duizenden mensen in de stembureau stelden met de hand. Erg veel werk, maar dat maakt de fraude haast onmogelijk.
Nu
staat in bijna elke gemeente een stemcomputer. Een druk op de knop en je stem verdwijnt in het apparaat. Je moet er maar op vertrouwen dat hij eerlijk telt. En komt je stem wel bij de juiste partij terecht. Kan je fraude plegen met de stemcomputer?
Zeker, je kunt fraude plegen met een stemcomputer op het moment dat je controle hebt over het apparaat.
En dus overal bij komt. Bart Jacobs is hoogleraar aan de Radboud Universiteit Nijmegen. Hij kent de beveiliging van de stemcomputer en maakt zich grote zorgen. Je kunt je programmeren zoals je wil, dus je kunt ook tellen zoals je wil. Al vaak heeft hij de overheid gewaarschuwd voor de slechte beveiliging van de stemcomputer. Dat heb ik al eerder gezegd in interviews en bij gelegenheden en bij voordracht ook. De overheid
The audio is cool, isn't it?
heeft dat niet opgepikt. We hebben onze geleende
Computer open laten maken en laten onderzoeken door onafhankelijke computerdeskundigen. Dat was in ons land nog nooit eerder gedaan. Het deskundige oordeel is buitengewoon duidelijk. Die stemcomputer is echt onveilig.
We starten het onderzoek. Samen met de actiegroep Wij vertrouwen stemcomputers niet. Dit is feitelijk een
huiscomputer. Goed, we gaan eens even kijken wat we gekregen hebben.
Rop
Gonggrijp is een van de drijvende krachten achter de actiegroep. Hij heeft Access for All opgericht, Nederlands eerste internetaanbieder. Maar hij is vooral gespecialiseerd in de beveiliging van computers. Eerst kijken we hoe die werkt. Dat begint met de kandidatenlijst voor de verkiezingen.
Here is basically where we first play with it. They filmed when we first opened the box. This is where we actually run the entire life. This is the PC software it's used to set up the data in those blue modules. That's the reader device you see there. This is actually Delphi software that uses crappy database, and all sorts of old stuff. Alleen maar begrijpen, het is alleen maar leren hoe die werkt.
Nooit eerder is een Nederlandse stemcomputer zo grondig onderzocht. door onafhankelijke deskundigen. Over de resultaten van het onderzoek bestaat geen twijfel.
Frauderen met de stemcomputer is vrij makkelijk. Als je de stemcomputer in handen hebt, is het kwestie van een nieuw programma erin stoppen.
Maar hoe gaat dat eigenlijk, frauderen met een stemcomputer? Alles wat je nodig hebt is een schroevendraaier en 2 chips. Op deze chip staat de software waarmee je kan frauderen. Het verwisselen van de chips kost nog geen 5 minuten. De kwaadaardige software zit erin en de computer doet precies wat jij wil.
Dat is toch wel even schrikken als je realiseert hoe makkelijk in
de praktijk inderdaad kan. Dat is niet best natuurlijk. De chips zijn verwisseld en de verkiezingsfraude kan beginnen. Ik ga nu stemmen op alle partijen behalve de frauderende partij 2006.
Eén stem uitbrengen op het CDA.
Zo is klaar. Ik ga één stem uitbrengen op de VVD.
So this is where we basically turned off all those security features that I just talked to you about. Because otherwise it would very easily be detected as a test election with only 4 votes. En CDA hebben geen stemmen gekregen. En de frauderende partij 2006 heeft 2 stemmen.
Zo makkelijk gaat het. De stemmen voor PvdA en CDA gaan naar de frauderende partij 2006.
Als je het subtiel doet, heeft niemand het in de gaten. Zelfs
de fabrikant niet.
We weten nu hoe makkelijk de stemcomputer is te kraken.
We weten zelfs hoe je kan frauderen met verkiezingen. Maar voor een geslaagde verkiezingsfraude heb je toegang nodig tot meerdere stemcomputers tegelijk. Dit is Rotterdam. Hier staan 400
stemcomputers.
This is where they show how they are stored in Rotterdam.
Daar kan ik geen uitspraak over doen.
Wij wel. Binnen en buiten is geen beveiliging. Als onze camera uit het zicht is, wordt dat bevestigd.
Maar hangen hier veel camera's of alarminstallaties, weet ik het? Nee. Niet? Nee. Maar zou dat niet moeten dan?
Ja, dat is de grote vraag.
Een loods met 400 stemcomputers. Zonder bewakingscamera's, zonder alarmsysteem. En bovendien kan je zo naar binnen...
Oops, I did that again. Oh, that's bad. I figured I would pause it. Never mind, I'll just restart it. It was very funny because that place where they had 400 voting computers, when the camera was already really off, and they were walking towards the car together with the woman that's in the picture, she said, well, we don't really need security anyway because it's such a bad neighborhood. There was like they were growing weed over there and they were doing ecstasy over there. So, and she literally said, it's really not a problem because nobody dares to come here at night. And they were still kicking themselves 2 weeks later that they didn't have that on tape.
Goedenavond. Stemmen.
To that bit over there a little bit. Now this is well watched. Well, this is just a lot of people reacting to how bad the security is. This is kind of an interesting thought. So we'll let that run for a bit. Run for a bit. Run. Well. Ja, eigenlijk iedereen die toegang heeft.
Hoe kan het toch dat de stemcomputer zo slecht is beveiligd? Dat komt door de ouderwetse techniek. Het apparaat stamt uit het midden van de jaren 80. Computerbeveiliging stond toen nog in de kinderschoenen.
Toen heerste er veel groter
optimisme met betrekking tot gebruik van computers dan nu. Nu weten we allemaal van virussen, kwaadaardige software, internetverbindingen waar allerlei rommel over binnen kan komen. Toen de tijd was dat besef niet zo doorgedrongen.
Dit is
de Xbox. Deze populaire spelcomputer is veel moeilijker te kraken dan onze stemcomputer.
De samenleving is veiliger dan de stemcomputer. De Xbox is veiliger, want daar kun je niet zomaar je eigen software op draaien.
Jawel, dus dan ga je een chipje in en dan draait je software. Met deze sleutel start je de stemcomputer. Maar alle stemcomputers in Nederland hebben exact dezelfde sleutel. En hij is makkelijk na te maken.
Er valt inderdaad wat voor te zeggen van laten we er nu nog eens...
Another funny thing about that key is that when we type that lock manufacturer, it turns out that that particular lock only has one key. There's, if you read the report we wrote, both the lock and key and the key have order numbers. And if you put that order number into Google, you will find many places that sell that particular key for €1 each. So all the keys, all the spare keys we have, are actually originals. And the recommended application for the key is office furniture.
Goed naar kijken of dat in de huidige situatie nog de meest veilige
oplossing is. En wat zegt u dan, ja of nee? Nee, ik vind eigenlijk van niet. Dit past niet meer in deze tijd. De overheid blijft het maar herhalen. De Nederlandse stemcomputer is betrouwbaar en veilig. Het is allemaal zeer uitvoerig getest. Het zijn zeer betrouwbare machines. En wij gebruiken deze stemmachines nu vanaf 1995. En we hebben er heel veel plezier bij gehad. De machines die wij hier hebben staan, die hebben de TNO-goedkeuring. Dus we gaan ervan uit dat dat veilig is. Dat weet u niet zeker. Dat weet ik wel zeker. Want vertel de TNO-goedkeuring. Dit is TNO in Delft. In Nederland staan in totaal 8000 stemcomputers. TNO test er elke 4 jaar slechts eentje.
Als bij de kruidenier een weegschaal staat, die wordt netjes nagekeken of hij nog wel netjes weegt. Jouw auto wordt nagekeken. Liften worden nagekeken. Brandblussers worden nagekeken. Maar stemcomputers niet, hoor. We testen er elke 4 jaar één van. Is dat wetenschappelijk verantwoord? Nee, dat is niet wetenschappelijk verantwoord. Maar er is hier wel meer over op te merken wat twijfelachtig is. Zoals de testrapporten van TNO. Die zijn geheim. Publiek en pers mag ze niet inzien. We weten dus niet of de stemmen eerlijk worden geteld. En dan, waar kijkt TNO eigenlijk naar? Je kunt zeggen, alles ook met toeval te maken kan hebben. Stroomuitval, je moet er geen schok van krijgen, je moet er glas water overheen kunnen. Je kunt zeggen over temperatuurwisselingen, maar helemaal niet over een kwaadwillend individu of een kwaadwillende partij die stemmen zou willen stelen. De stemcomputer wordt gemaakt door Nedap, getest door TNO. Het belangrijke stemproces is uitbesteed aan bedrijven. Heeft u het idee dat iemand bij de overheid weet hoe het hele systeem in elkaar steekt? Nee, want dat heeft de overheid gedelegeerd aan TNO. Dus niemand bij de Nederlandse overheid weet hoe de stemcomputer werkt? In detail, zover ik weet niet. Nee, dat weten ze alleen bij TNO en bij de fabrikant. Ja. En niemand van de overheid weet dat. Zover ik weet dan niemand dat in detail. Dat is normaal. Nee, dat vind ik ook normaal. Ik heb ook vaker in het verleden gezegd dat het vreemd is dat zo weinig mensen in Nederland precies weten hoe de stem geteld wordt. Dus hier kan het zijn dat het volledig buitenstaanders dat een klein groepje mensen invloed kan uitoefenen op de verkiezingsuitslag en heel veel stemmen elkaar tegelijk. De technische details die deze reportage ondersteunen zijn na te lezen op de website van de actiegroep wijvertrouwenstemcomputers.nl. De Nederlandse stemcomputer, hij is ouderwets, maar je
kan er wel mee schaken.
Is een schaakcomputer makkelijk te verstaan?
Jawel, deze speelt niet zo heel sterk.
We hebben de stemcomputer.
A large part of the challenge is the underneath of the foil keys there is actually plastic. So we had to figure out a way to make the magnetic pieces stick. And Frank Rieger figured out that we could take 5-cent coins, because they're magnetic, and put little pieces of tape, put a piece of paper over it, then put 5-cent coins on each field, and put tape over that, and then put a new piece of paper with the... And then if you put them right, you could use the edge of the coin to press the foil buttons. So that was...
Ongeschonden teruggebracht. Klaar voor de komende verkiezingen.
Maar de conclusies over de veiligheid van de stemcomputer vragen om politiek commentaar. Minister Nicolai, die hierover gaat, is op de Antillen. Tweede Kamerleden waren wel in staat om onze reportage te bekijken en te becommentariëren.
Lisbeth Spies, CDA.
Anyway, so they get these parliamentarians in there looking at it, and this is the thing they're most upset about is, oh my God, how could they have gotten a voting computer? We must make sure that never happens again. We must make legislation to make sure that no outsiders can ever get a voting machine anymore. So that's the thing that was most shocking to them. So the minister, at this point, they knew they had a problem. Basically, these MPs wanted the minister to. Yeah, we know. I just wanted to quickly show, I've shown it before, the credits for this hack, because a lot of people, some of you may know, some of these people buy them a beer, if you see them. Now, as part of that broadcast that I didn't play because I skipped it, is the fact that we were announcing, through that broadcast, they announced that we would be taking government to court if they didn't address these issues and if they didn't make for trustworthy e-voting. The court case would be a civil case, and it would basically, for a civil case, you need harm. You need somebody treating you unjust. And we basically said government is treating anyone unjust if they don't supply for honest elections. And honest elections, we had all the treaties and legislation. Ulrich has been through that for the German case, for those that have been to his talk. Basically, we wrote a 12-page document sort of listing all the treaties and everything, doing all the legal mumbo-jumbo. Our lawyers did, basically saying that we would take government to court. Basically defining why we felt voting computers didn't match these criteria. Then the next morning, this was on the 4th of October, that broadcast that you just saw. The next morning we had a press conference in the Parliamentary News Center, which had a lot of press. This is just a tiny fraction of what was there. And where we also announced the radio stuff, the radio leakage. I'll show you more about that later. We basically told everybody what we knew and a few extra things so they didn't feel ripped off by having everything in the broadcast of last night. And then that evening, of course, we made all the news. This is just one of the news broadcasts.
Dat vindt althans een groep computerkenners die uitvoerig onderzoek deed naar het apparaat dat het potlood heeft verdrongen. De stemcomputer.
Anyway, you don't speak Dutch,
de beveiliging van het apparaat is zo lek als een mandje, concludeert de groep. En werkt dus verkiezingsfraude in de hand.
Through it. As you can see, it shows the press conference, it shows the stack of keys, it shows me changing ROMs, it shows the Nedap guy, who basically says, well, it's really funny, this group should have called themselves We Don't Trust People, instead of We Don't Trust Voting Computers. And he really doesn't say much more. And it's an interesting company, Nedap. It's a very interesting company. Anyway, so this is the responsible minister who said that we're doing everything to protect these computers. We're sealing the ROMs and we're sealing the machines and we're putting extra high security seals on everything so nobody can mess with it anymore. And it's completely secure. We're glad that these things were pointed out to us, but now we're fixing them, was basically their statement. As you can see, the Irish TV was there. Because they were very interested in this as well. And this is the SDU new vote machine, just as a lead out. Another thing we did, because it was very hard, we noticed, to get the point across with the secrecy of the ballot, with the radio thing. So we made a little film that we put on YouTube and Google Video. That basically, I'll put you through it a little bit faster. It shows us setting up the machine. It shows that 90% of the votes are cast on it shows the operation of the machine, that it has an audio signal. It's a very short clip. And then it shows this scanner programmed to show. Basically, what we've done is we've taken a scanner and then we fed the audio into the audio in of a TomTom device, which was programmed to detect, to distinct between these two tones. We didn't feel like explaining this whole thing with the special characters. We just said, here, we can detect what's being voted. It was a very simple clip, basically so that anybody could see what was going on. Nobody could ever deny it. And here you hear that signal from across the street. And then the next morning, of course, there were cartoons like this one. And the fun thing is you don't only know what people voted, but you also hear all the traffic reports. Then at October 12th, there was a parliamentary debate. First, we thought nothing had happened. Oh my God, we did a press conference, we did the hack, and nothing happens. It's like it all dies. The minister and all the parties present thank us for the good work, and then they, in the same breath, they say, but let's make sure you never get another voting machine. Thank you for pointing this out. Now go away, please. It's the biggest amount of headache I feel that our government has ever thanked anybody for. The minister explains all these short-term measures, putting seals on the boxes, making sure that they can still have an election with these Nedap machines. And they announced that the Secret Service, AIVD we call them, will look at these radio emissions because apparently they have some experience in this field. And he admits that, yes, there are major organizational problems, because all these journalists kept asking, but is it true that there is no security specification in the regulations? And is it true that TNO only tests one computer? So he admitted that there was major flaws in the legislation and in the way e-voting is implemented. And he announced, and this was really the biggest win, he announced an independent commission to revise the entire process. Now, this was everything we could win, because that's all government is ever going to do, is appoint a commission to look at changes. The minister isn't going to say, well, okay, we'll just not do it anymore. That's not going to happen. So this was really the biggest win. Then after that, the media that we had expected to happen on October 4th and 5th, when we were doing these announcements, happened on October 12th, when through those statements by the minister, we'll basically have an independent commission, a government commission, look at the entire process and see if it needs revising. By that statement, the minister basically said, these people have been right all along, and the media instantly realized that this was a story that wasn't going to go away, that this was going to go on and on and on, even till past the elections. So there was a huge increase in press. At the same time, of course, we still had this SDU new vote machine. The Nedap, for all you can say, is a well-designed machine. It's very sturdy, it never breaks, it does what it's supposed to do, and it's a known function. If you can trust the ROMs, of course you can't, and of course it's still bad for a number of other reasons, but it's a well-designed machine. Now, in Amsterdam, we had to vote on the SDU new vote machine, which was an embedded Windows machine with a GPRS modem built in. So we sent an open letter saying, dear Mr. Mayor, we think they're insecure. We have a number of reasons to think they're insecure, because it has a modem, because it's embedded Windows, and it probably doesn't get security updates. Have us look at it, we'll check it for free. And he said, no, you can't, they're not mine, they're SDUs. And then we said, well, that's a privatized election, isn't it? You've lost control over our elections. Which made for another interesting round of press and going back and forth. And then things got quiet, and we were sort of thinking about the next step. I was actually in Berlin when the next step happened. The next step was completely unexpected. You remember the Secret Service was going to look at the radio aspect. And then on the 30th of October, our responsible minister decertifies the SDU new vote, basically making it no longer legal to be used in elections. Taking 2,000 machines off the market, putting 34 municipalities, because so their license was suspended. Now this was when things started going a little crazy. We were no longer able
Stemcomputers afgekeurd. Hoofdstad stemt weer met potlood.
This was the opening item, like the leader before the news starts. And then the item is about us, and this is another news broadcast.
Stemcomputers voldoen niet. Minister doet ze in de ban. RTL Nieuws.
This is
Goedenavond, nieuws van maandag 30 oktober.
Het rode potlood is terug van weg geweest.
Straks bij de verkiezingen duikt het in zo'n 35 gemeenten weer op. Want 10% van de stemcomputers is afgekeurd. Ze blijken...
De straling is namelijk zo sterk dat tot tientallen meters rondom de computer gelezen kan worden wat iemand stemt. En dus is er geen sprake van geheime stemming. Stemmen met een rood potlood en een groot vel papier is in Nederland bijna verdwenen. Dat is dus gemeente natuurlijk nog zo. Maar op
22 november keert het rode potlood even terug. Want ruim 1100 stemcomputers deugen niet.
Zal ik nog even drukken zo?
De actiegroep wij vertrouwen stemcomputers niet, zei het al eerder. Stemcomputers zijn af te luisteren. Volgens minister Nicolai is met
90% alles oké. Maar de overige 10% computers van het bedrijf SDU deugen niet.
Coming into that press conference. So this is when it really got crazy. This is when the press went crazy, when everybody went crazy.
Concludeert de AIVD dat op enkele tientallen meters.
This is when this kind of cartoon happened. That's the three crosses are the Amsterdam City logo. At that point, we were becoming sort of scared of the amount of chaos we were causing. Because at this point, the minister didn't only announce that he was decertifying the SDU new vote machine, but he also announced that nobody except the voter and the person operating that little button should get within 5 meters of a Nedap. That the entire nation's police force would be mobilized to surveil the polling stations to make sure that nobody would be walking around with suspicious equipment. So this is when the entire country started going profoundly nutty, nuttier than we really wanted them to go. We announced there would be no court case, basically because we were afraid of winning, more than we were afraid of losing. Because the SDU case proved that by then they were supporting all the municipalities that had to switch either back to Nedap because there was some stock of Nedaps they found, partly in Germany. So your voting machines are actually being lent to other nation states and then returned and used. So, so they found stocks of Nedap machines for some of these communities. Other communities, such as Amsterdam, had to switch back to paper because Amsterdam made up half of these machines that they couldn't use anymore, so they could never find that many. So Amsterdam had only done one e-vote, so all the expertise to do paper was still there. So we were getting kind of scared, figuring this amount of chaos for 34 communities. There's like 500 municipalities in Holland, 480 or something. 34 communities not being able to use the machine they were supposed to be using became a round-the-clock job for 50 support people at the ministry. 50. The ministry couldn't do anything else anymore. They were going completely berserk. Everybody was, and they said we have a plan B. If this court case happens to ban the Nedap machines, then we'll just go vote on paper. We later, from multiple sources, heard that they had no plan B. The plan B was to postpone the elections. Now, Dutch electoral law doesn't have postponed elections. It doesn't. Because that's what governments would want to do, wouldn't it? Wouldn't they just postpone the elections? So electoral law doesn't provide for that. So that would mean Holland would be thrown into what's called a constitutional crisis. That's when government is basically illegal. And that's not something we would ever want to cause. Because if you think about it, that would make everybody really mad at us. Parties would say, yes, but that means we peaked too early, now the other guys won. All sorts of chaos would have happened that wouldn't naturally necessarily be conducive to our arguments. Then, as part of the election, and because this is really close to the elections, this is already in November, this is all happening, we announced, by the way, the fact that we were not doing this court case. We announced that by sending emails out to the press, to our press list, at 10 minutes to 1, and then we had to go drive somewhere because we had an appointment. And then at 10 minutes to 1 we announced this, and then we turned on the radio, and it made the 1 o'clock radio newses. So by this point, things had gotten really, we were the election issue. We were bigger than any party's political campaign. Which is really strange, if you think about it. It's well beyond anything we had hoped for. Because we canceled the court case, we suddenly were realos. We weren't fundis anymore, which got us a lot of criticism. It got us a lot of criticism from people that didn't understand, from people that said we should go on fighting and die fighting if necessary. These people never run in front of you. They always are behind you going, die fighting. And as part of the elections, we knew this a little bit beforehand, but as part of these elections, governments always, as part of any national election, they send out invitations to all these international bodies. Please come observe our elections. Feel welcome to observe our elections. And As a rule, these bodies say, well, you're Germany or you're Holland. Don't worry, just do your elections. Don't worry about it. In our case, we got the OSCE to do a fact-finding mission because there was obviously problems with e-voting in the country that had e-voting 100% and where e-voting was non-controversial. Wasn't a full election observation mission. What is there to observe? Person presses button, printout comes out. Numbers are consistent with printout. So we had this fact-finding mission, and they visited, as part of their mission, we had the mission visit my house, which is also a really interesting event. And it's really interesting, at least it was good for me to notice that I was telling them all these things that we had learned, like the fact that our internet voting, the government was basically supplying their own or a very close to government printing press with a list that could basically be used to get everybody's vote. And they were shocked, like, oh my God, you mean the Secret Service can calculate what everybody voted? And we said, yeah. And it's good to see that outside of our borders people actually do get shocked. Holland is a country which traditionally has a very large amount of trust in government. And governments, sort of on average, have been relatively trustworthy. So we have too much trust in government now that governments the world over are changing, I guess, in a way. Then election day rolled around. And as part of election day, I'll show you the news broadcast. Again, we made all the news.
Niet overal gebeurt het stemmen met de stemcomputer. In 10 gemeenten stemmen ze altijd al met het potlood en nog eens 24 andere gemeenten zijn daartoe gedwongen.
Dat de stemcomputers na onderzoek zijn afgekeurd. Ze bleken te fraudegevoelig. Dat gebeurde na een actie van de stichting Wij vertrouwen stemcomputers niet.
Dat werd door de actiegroep taarten gedistribueerd in Amsterdam.
This is what we did on election day.
Wij delen appeltaart uit omdat we heel blij zijn dat...
We passed out apple pie to all polling stations in Amsterdam. That's 500 of them. So we bought 2 pallets worth of apple pie. And carted them and had 25 teams in a car driving them to every polling station in Amsterdam, basically thanking these people with a nice letter with it, thanking them because they had control over our elections back. Because we figured that if 1,500 people talk to 500,000 other people in a grumpy mood about us, about this crazy action group that got us to do this paper counting again, and we hate it, and and we're upset, and that's not good. If 500,000 people hear a negative story about you, that's bad. So we figured we'd do something about it.
Mensen in de stembureaus hun controlerende functie. Het is niet alleen maar zitten kijken dat de juiste mensen op de computer stemmen, maar dat is ook kijken of de telling van de stemmen werkelijk klopt.
It's just Dutch stuff. So then the elections were over. It was December, things were eerily quiet because all the media attention was gone. And the ministry didn't do anything anymore, and we didn't have anything to react to, no press releases to write about stupid stuff that they did. They didn't have any press releases to write about stuff we did. This is all done by the Constitutional Affairs and Legislation Department at the ministry. This is normally the quietest department of the ministry. This is where people don't run, they walk. This is... and this time, they were working like crazy. There's lots of people there that just were working long weeks ever since July. And we met some of them at the Kiesraad event where they did the official results, where they announced the official counts. And some of these people looked mighty tired. We talked to some of them, and we interacted to some of the people that were on the other side, which are good people. These people mean well. They've lost control of the elections, which is bad. We must take them back. We must force them to take this control back. But they're good people. They're friendly. And they have been working 80, 100-hour weeks just like we had, ever since the elections were early and then our campaign came. So we got some time to relax, reflect a little bit. And then just a couple of days ago, the commission was announced. The chairman is a former justice minister and a former chairman of parliament. He's one of the wiser elder statesmen. We have a club of wiser elder statesmen who are actually officially appointed to help out government if something really gets bad. sort of the troubleshooters, and he's definitely one of them. And it really all depends on who the computer experts and the municipal election guy are going to be, as to where this leads to, where this is all going to go. This is some of the questions that they've asked this commission. Really good questions. How did the introduction happen? Who was responsible? They realize something has gone wrong. A special subcommission is actually doing nothing but looking back. Which mistakes have we made and what can we learn from them? Which is an exemplary reaction from government. I mean, you just do a couple months of activism and then they look back and figure out what we've done wrong. Then there's election-related questions. What is the role of IT? Which step needs to be revised? Are all the responsibilities assigned? Is the election process verified, monitored closely enough? Who should do this? What authority is needed? And then there's also voting computer-related questions. Which inherent risks are connected to the current voting machines, electronic voting in general, or voting with pencil and paper? Are there alternatives? And then they ask about internet voting, which is the only thing we need to block now. The only thing we need to do right now to get a paper trail or to get something that is verifiable is to make sure that they don't flee forward into the direction of internet voting. But I don't think they will, but we have to make sure that they don't. Anyway, so these are pretty wise questions. How do technological developments interact with the election process? Elections are weird because they don't happen for 3 years every once in a while. And in IT, the world really changes in 3 years. So every time they run an election, the world has changed. From now on, I'll be skipping back and forth between thoughts and slides and crazy stuff. This is sort of the attention that this topic had gotten before 2006. This is what happens if presentation packages have really nice graphing features. You end up using them. So indulge with me. This is my first keynote presentation. This is actually the attention this topic had gotten, where blue is just mentions of e-voting in general, and red just specifically mentions how can we trust the result. It specifically mentions the key question. And you can see 98 sticking out because there was lots of problems with e-voting, because that's the year everybody got virus scanners, and all the networks slowed down because this software package kept opening and closing its file because it was from the 80s. So that's the 98 peak. And then in 2004, those were all the Irish, all the press that was gotten because of the Irish refusing to use our machine. As you can see, 22 mentions in 2004 of our issue, and then came 2006. July is when we started our campaign, and we already noticed that at 30 mainstream media mentions, because these are all mentions in mainstream media, at 30, 35 mainstream media mentions, that was already above their pain threshold. That was already hurting. So you can imagine what October did to them. Now, of course, we haven't won the war. This is just humor. There's still a lot of work needs to be done. Also in Holland, we need to monitor what the Commission is doing. We need to make sure that it's not just delay tactics. Although we are confident that they really do want to change the system. They really do want to add verifiability to the elections. They do see the point. And even if they don't see the point, they know that lots of other people do and that they need to do something, because otherwise the headache is going to come back and come back and come back. These are some of the reasons. I think for me, most important is the situation in the USA just means that this issue is going to come back and come back and come back for the next decade. And it's going to infect more and more countries where there is black box voting. Even if nothing else happens in these countries, it's going to come back. People understood the issues. We proved actual flaws, which is really important. Also, there isn't any real adversaries. This campaign wouldn't have been this easy if we were fighting Monsanto, or if we were fighting Shell, or if we were fighting... I'm honest enough to admit that these are flaky adversaries. What, gross turnover, a couple of million, strange business of writing software used by a couple of hundred municipalities, basically good-willing people that are just misled by this one character that doesn't understand security and doesn't understand where the trust should lie. These aren't real adversaries also. And we had a lot of luck. We could have easily failed getting a Nedap, which would have basically made it very uncertain that our campaign would have gone anywhere. Although, if you remember the graph with the media mentions, also at 30 media mentions per month, we were convincing people. We were getting more and more serious mentions. We were taken more and more seriously at that rate. Had we kept that up, the issues would have gotten across also. It didn't all depend on getting the Nedap. I think it's important to mention in this audience that it was a real hacker campaign. It makes people think about trust, computers, technology. It's about universal access to knowledge. We must be able to find out how our own voting process works. Social engineering, lockpicking, reverse engineering, well-executed media strategy. In other words, it's like we've been training for this for 20 years. My God. Another thing, as I said, I'm just jumping thoughts right here. Another thing that pops to mind is I need to explain why E&I voting is still being pushed. Why would anybody want this? There's a lot of pressure from special interest groups, and especially the blind lobby in Holland is very strong. They see their politicians often. And they want machines where blind people can vote independently from being helped. Because you can actually help blind people vote. That's legal. You can't help people that are, for instance, mentally handicapped. But anybody that's physically unable to find the button or to find the mark on the piece of paper, you can help them, the people in the office, in the polling station. But that's an important lobby. And it's a legitimate interest also. It's a legitimate interest not to have to tell anybody what you're voting. And there's also lots of people that want voting from a different polling station. If you're not in your hometown, so you still vote for your own municipal election. Suppose it's a municipal election day. You still vote for your own election, but you're not home. And all the technical people at the ministry, but also at all these companies and at lots of other companies, have told government that this is all possible. Maybe some of us are even responsible for saying, yeah, sure, you can do that, you can organize that, you can use the internet to do anything. And a lot of people ended up believing this, and there's a lot of pressure from Parliament to get these things done for a legitimate reason. Take, for instance, the issue of prisoners voting. You can't register prisoners in the municipality where the prison is, because sometimes prisons are pretty big and municipalities are pretty small. The prison would dominate the municipality. So prisoners must vote, if they have the right to vote, if it's not taken from them as part of their conviction, then prisoners vote in their home municipality, and they can't go home, so they must then get somebody else to vote for them if that's legal in the system. Legitimate interests again. There's also pressure from city employees, just simply too lazy to count the votes. E-voting is great for getting people to sit in the polling station, because they can actually go home when it's all over and watch the TV. Because it's really ironic that the people that organize the elections are the ones that don't get to see the outcome until they come home way after it's all over. And there's the desire to feel modern, to feel high-tech, to be part of this modern world. It's ironic that these computers were introduced. These were often the first computers in certain schools in the 80s and 90s. Many schools in Holland, this was their first computer. There's so many places where government could do so much more with computers, and they have to use it on this. Another thing that popped to mind, why does Germany have e-voting? Does anybody know? Germany has e-voting because some city officials in Cologne were jealous because Maastricht people got to go home earlier. It's true. This is why your government was pushed into introducing it here. Also wanted to quickly point that this was very much a Dutch-German campaign. As you can see, lots of people from Berlin and other places in Germany have helped out. The situations are very similar. If it dies in Holland, it probably dies in Germany, so that's why we started the campaign in Holland. But there's really lots of reasons to start campaigning here in Germany. I'll show you one. Very comparable to the situation in Germany, except we're smaller and much more urbanized, and we had a severe crisis in education. Any developments involving technology, stupidity, and a combination of those are likely to happen in Holland first. Having said that, the most likely outcome of what we're having in Holland is a verifiable system, either paper trail or, who knows, even paper ballots. And Germany might find itself in a huge rollout, because Nedap is ready to sell. And lots of German municipalities in all the Bundesländer where it's legal are ready to buy. So you may find yourself in the middle of a huge rollout, much bigger than Holland, of systems that we're just getting rid of. Which is something that you should all get involved in. There's a lot of things that need to happen in Germany. One of them is to get a Nedap, because then you can actually prove that it's insecure on a German machine, because otherwise they'll just say, well, that's a Dutch machine and German machines are different. And I highly advise going by the book. We haven't broken any laws in the Netherlands in the course of this campaign, and I think that's the single thing that annoyed them the most. Also, it's a lot of work to do something surreptitiously, to get these Nedaps and then to actually document them in a way where other people can reverse engineer them. It's not just a matter of dumping the ROMs, it's making pictures of everything, making sure that you never need to go back and see the device again. Making sure, and then having basically two teams, the team that knows who did it and the team that doesn't, and just don't even go there. Keep it all by the book. Another reason we all need to hurry, not just Germany, but everybody here in Europe needs to hurry, is US manufacturers are coming to Europe. ESNS, one of the three big manufacturers in the US, there's Sequoia, ESNS, and Diebold. They're ready to enter the Dutch and German markets, and others will follow. Now, legislation in Germany and legislation in Holland doesn't prescribe anything. They could bring whatever they have in the US with all their touchscreen calibration problems and all their crazy stuff that's happening there, plus all the rumors of intentional fraud. These manufacturers could be entering the Dutch market, and I mean, nothing we've seen so far prepares us for what's going to happen if these people come. So we protect our elections fast. So what needs to happen now? We need to kill the black box voting phenomenon. I think it's dying. I think it's dying worldwide. There's federal legislation being prepared in America to demand paper trail, but they only demand it on new installations. And they've just bought $3.5 billion worth of black box voting stuff, so that's bad. But at least they know it's not something that can happen too much into the future. I think it's dying also in Europe, after what we've done to Nedap and after what's going to happen in other countries as this gets more and more attention. This topic is never going to go away. So we've set up a website which is still very much under construction. It's also a wiki, except it doesn't have any of the nice skin, it doesn't have any of the nice stuff, but it's definitely a place that people could start putting stuff about their national situation, start thinking, start coordinating, get involved. This is basically what we have to explain to all our politicians. These issues will just haunt you. We will do whatever is necessary to get rid of these machines. Computers, sorry. There's another loose thought that popped into my head that I wanted to throw out here because there's lots of people that may be able to do something about it. There is the software issue. There is lots of software being used in elections, and it's usually very crummy stuff, and some of it is written by the people that actually sell the black box voting equipment. It's the tabulation stuff. It's the software that creates the results from the individual polling stations. Whether there's black box voting used or whether it's just a paper vote, there's lots of software in between, and a lot of that is not open. I found out after my last election how hard it is to get results at the polling station level in some machine-readable form from all these different municipalities. so that nobody really except the government, and the government needs Nedap software to do it, and there's no regulations whatsoever regarding that software. Nobody except the government can actually do the addition, can actually do the math. So that's bad. So this is the current situation. These packages are complex in the sense that they're real election workflow management, and there's lots of official documents. Every candidate has to be notified that his application is now official, and then there has to be a notification that the period has ended for this, and then so in the preparation for an election and in the aftermath, there's tons of official paperwork happening, also at the municipal level. And a lot of that is done by ISS, Integraal Stemsysteem, or IWS, Integrales Wahlsystem, as they call it in Germany. A lot of that is done by the software in the form of Word templates, but it takes a lot of work from the election workers. It's very lame sort of stuff, and it comes with black box voting. And I think some open source election management software is in order. There could be, I'm sort of in my brain, I'm envisioning some kind of international effort to make software that helps election officials the world over, where basically the country's election system is a module. There's no huge competition, there's just a couple of really shoddily written software packages. And I think we could do well. You could import and export data from all sorts of formats, including comma-delimited and spreadsheet formats. You could envision the country election body, the Bundeswahlleiter or whoever, publishing a blank spreadsheet with all the formulas in it. And then you could just import all the data at the lowest possible level, at the level of each polling station separately. And you could press the button and it would go all the way to parliament seats without needing any software. You could just have the spreadsheet do that. You could do cryptographic signatures. You could start spreading tools that way, real-time graphs, be the media, serve the media. Share ways you can view the data. I don't know, interesting ways. And the kicker is you could do a GNU plus no black box voting license, meaning that the software cannot be used to process data that comes from non-verifiable sources. And some ideas as to how that could possibly be financed, or it's really not that big a project. Nedap writes this software that's used all over Europe by these countries that have their system. They have a few people full-time doing software, both for this machine and for the election management software. There's no huge job here. It's not like Apache. It's not like anything else that's open source. It's really manageable. Another thing everybody here should be considering is to become a poll worker. Talk to your municipality. If you really feel the elections need to be verifiable and that they belong to all of us, then you should also be willing to do the grunt work. It's underpaid, it's boring, but they're facing an aging crowd. They're facing I've seen it in Amsterdam as we took these apple pies around. Average age is over 50 in Dutch polling stations. And so young people are needed. A new wave of people is needed to protect the elections. If there are no poll workers, nobody counts the votes. And if nobody counts the votes, everybody will use e-voting. And everybody uses e-voting, democracy ends. It's really that simple. This is sort of my closing thought. There's no sense in having elections unless you know how they work. This is nice. I kept a lot of time for discussion. Let's have questions. Yeah, let's explain how we do this. There's one microphone. And I suggest we only have one microphone. Let's use that one because it's closest to me. Sorry. No. But My suggestion is to use one microphone because then we have one queue instead of having to swap back and forth. Is that okay with everybody, just queuing on this one microphone?
So when my understanding of this Dutch scenario is that the reason that the voting machines were taken off was not because of the untrustworthiness of the machines, but because of the emissions.
Yes.
So it seems like
well,
we sort
that's
of
the
won the
question
battle for the wrong reasons.
Yes. We won for the wrong reasons in terms of the SDU machine. The thing is, that's the only question they could ask that they knew wouldn't compromise their use of the Nedap machine, or they figured wouldn't compromise their use of the Nedap machine. Going into computer security, to them was a can of worms. So they I think, deliberately kept the question to the Secret Service really narrow.
Yeah, I'd like to know if, I mean, personally, I think open source is bullshit for voting machines or for voting computers, because, I can't take my laptop into the voting booth to check if the open source is still correct.
There's no point in having open source if you can't verify that it's running on the particular machine that you're voting in front of. Yeah, this is true.
But I don't want, your opinion whether, I mean, I think you should have pen and papers and nothing more. No crypto stuff, nothing, pen, paper, and that's it.
Well, the thing is, this is true for, in my opinion, this is true for what happens in the polling station. But it's not necessarily true for once the results are published. If you have the results per polling station and if they are openly available, then by all means, let's have software to verify that the addition is right. I'm not sure I am completely against any use of computers in the polling station. I could envision, there's countries that have really complex elections, where there's like all these citizen initiatives, like in Switzerland, or where they're voting for the city dog catcher and the sheriff and who knows what. And there's countries that have really complex, hairy elections. And computers as a disambiguation tool, as an aid to creating a piece of paper which is then counted. For all I'm concerned, it could be counted automatically, or even sorted automatically so it's easy to count. I can see all sorts of ways where technology can still help us. I'm not in no way fundamentalist about the issue.
My comment is that Diebold is actually publishing job ads right now, so if anyone is looking for a job in the voting environment.
Oh yes, by all means,
Germany.
Let's, anybody that has the option of infiltrating a voting... Make sure you get the documents out without getting caught. Make sure they're not marked. Make sure there's no fingerprints, use Tor. But if you have the option of infiltrating somewhere where they write black box voting equipment, by all means do.
I wanted to say that I think you have it absolutely right that the situation in the United States is quite nightmarish. I've been having nightmares about it for a while now. If you could briefly speak, what do you think the best steps that could be taken there to take Diebold down and get this issue off of our backs?
Thermonuclear weapons. To get the issue off of our backs, I think we have to raise awareness, which is happening globally already. This issue is, it was nowhere 1 year ago. It was a fringe issue that nobody knew about 12 months ago. It's now a major issue in many, many, many countries. Many people know about it, it's in cartoons, it's all over the papers, and that's only going to increase. So I think, well, not just thanks to me, thanks to a lot of people actually. And the situation in the US is actually helping. It's actually being very helpful in getting these issues out there because you actually have dirty elections. Whereas, so thank you.
I was just curious why you cancelled the court case instead of postponing it to after the elections?
Because we couldn't win. If we had, chances were we would have lost. Not because we felt we had a bad case, but because judges end up being pragmatic when constitutional crisis is a word. Judges become very...
if you do it now...
let me finish. We felt...
Sorry.
And if you lose a case, in the eyes of the public it means you had no case, because otherwise you would have won your case. It's very hard to convey that the strategy for pursuing a case is different than political strategy. And that you may lose although you were right, or that you may... Getting these things across to the public is very, very hard. So having lost the case would have really set us back. We had lost the SDU new vote, which had never been tested by anybody for security, which was a really strong point. I'm honest enough to say that that was really a reason, was really good on their part, as we had lost an important point in our case, in our lawsuit. Also, had we won, the country really would have gone into chaos.
If you won before the elections.
Sorry?
If you won before the elections, but if you win when there are years before the next election, there is time enough not to have chaos.
Well, right now, I first want to see what comes out of this commission, because I feel that going really adversarial right now, really going with the hammer, isn't all that necessary, because I think they've gotten the point. If we all become convinced that they didn't, or that they're trying to get rid of us without giving us any changes, then of course that changes. But for now, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt in terms of this commission. So I first want to see what comes out of that.
I was just going to add an extra reply on the situation in the United States. I work for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, and we've actually had some promising successes in fighting the crazy situation in the United States. One big victory is we managed to get a debug machine and get it to some computer security researchers at Princeton. Ed Felton managed to write a virus for this debug machine, and then Fox News showed the virus on primetime television. So that's making progress. There's also a lawsuit going on at the moment in Florida. There was one county where the numbers that came out looked extremely suspicious, and that may have been due to fraud in the machines, or it may have just been due to confusing graphics on the voting screens. But there's a lawsuit going on there at the moment, and maybe there'll be a rerun of the election in that county. So we'll talk more about this tomorrow or the day after in the EFF session.
Okay.
If I remember correctly, you wrote that the Commission will report by September 2007.
The Commission, yes.
Isn't that far too much time?
Far too much time? This is a government commission. I don't expect to see us having a completely new voting system anytime before 2010. Just because that's the speed of change in government. If you change a core process, the way government is organized, it's just not going to happen next year. I'm fairly realistic about that. It needs to change faster. I would love it to change faster. I'm just not holding my breath. I'm not expecting it any faster.
And is it guaranteed that people from your group will be inside that commission?
No, we explicitly said we did not want to be in the commission. They were probing to see if we were going for the commission. The thing is, this commission is independent, meaning that anybody in that commission that has had a point of view before the commission started doing its research is suspect. And the commission would then have to do interviews with the field. And the field would have us missing from it because we were in the commission.
And how the two experts will be selected?
I have no clue. This is at the discretion of the Interior Ministry, of the Minister and of the chairman of the Commission.
So this means that it is not impartial if the government chooses who will be there.
Well, it's not made out of. It's not built out of part. It's not built out of people that are there representing anybody. It's built out of people representing themselves. That's what they call an independent government commission. The thing is, I think they want to fix the problem, and they want to fix it by giving us elections that are verifiable. Because they know that the headache is going to come back and come back. I think we've actually convinced them that this is true. That the amount of headache that they've just had. If you want to convince any government in Germany, Austria, or wherever you're from, convince any government, in the next year, they can call the Interior Ministry in Holland and just ask anybody, including the janitor, whether getting voting machines is a good idea. And they'll get the right answer. So I think they actually want to fix the problem, so I think our interests actually align.
I've got a question that isn't directly related to what you do, but the way how you do it, if that's okay.
Sure.
The thing is something that we've all experienced, the problem of the blind followers, as you created that will blindly believe anything you say to them. Do you have any advice on how to get rid of those without too much fallout?
Without too much fallout. We basically put a couple of questions in the FAQ, basically saying, I deal with conspiracies a lot, and I believe the aliens are controlling my brain via satellite, and everything was a Mossad plot, and can I help you guys? And the answer is no. Go away. I think you have to be fairly serious about what you're doing, and you have to be serious about the fact that you're campaigning. And this is not about giving everybody the opportunity to campaign alongside you, no matter how crazy they are. This isn't an equal opportunity children's workshop. This is serious campaigning, and you're facing people that will use the presence of these people to say that you're just a bunch of crazies. So, yeah, and that's a point, that's an argument that you can get across. I've actually, people have called me, and I told them this on the phone. Look, the fact that you operate a website, because the vapor trail thing was actually somebody that called me, who had a major website that he put us on that was also very much about these vapor trails. And I said, look, you have a website that deals with a government conspiracy to sedate us all with chemicals from commercial airliners. That doesn't do well for our campaign. And you could be the nicest person on earth, but no thanks, bye.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned that being a poll worker isn't quite attractive. And I'm from Austria, and we had national elections in October, and I was looking into all the rules and laws regarding poll workers, and it was quite interesting to find out that all you need to become a poll worker in Austria is that you need your primary registered place of residence in Austria. So you can be an immigrant or whatever. Mm-hmm. All you need is your primary residence in Austria. That's so much on the poll worker issue. One more comment that well is quite positive. That is that a spokesperson of the Ministry of the Interior in Austria said that electronic voting is not going to happen, and that was very nice to know. So
smart move.
Yeah, I thought so too.
5 minutes, okay.
Hi, Rob. Just a quick comment about USA. Also, Alameda County in California, the average age of the poll workers is actually like 65 plus in last November. And the electronic voting machines in Alameda County were also not allowed to be used because they had no paper trail.
Mm-hmm.
I have only a small mark because you told about different voting system. We have at university a seminar, and we have a look at the different voting system, and we find out that if the voting system is more complex, they have less problems with unsolved or don't verified votes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's no reason to say...
Voting systems need to be very simple. They need to be... people in Azerbaijan, people in other countries, where was it? Azerbaijan was the one, and Ukraine was the other. People actually went to the polling stations to see what was happening to their ballots, to actually watch the fraud happen, to watch government take away their ballots and replace them by other ones. If you have a paper system that is really simple, that anyone can understand, you can force your government to do the fraud in front of your very eyes. In this case, it was the government coming in and taking the ballot boxes at gunpoint because there had been a terrorist threat, and the ballot boxes needed to be protected. But you can only do that if you can muster up thousands of people that understand how the process works, which in my mind rules out any cryptographic system, technical system, because I could never get a couple thousand people to monitor the security parameters of a system that I couldn't teach them to understand in an hour. So, yes, election systems need to be very simple.
Yeah, but it shows that countries with a complex system, they have no problem in verified or wrong votes. They don't count because the voters are too stupid to make the right crosses. They are less in countries with complex system. Instead of system, they only have to vote.
That's an interesting. So, unintentional spoiled ballots go up when the system is simpler. That's interesting.
Because I don't, it's very sick.
Okay.
We don't understand our voting system, so we need computers. It's a little bit stupid.
Well, there's lots of strange reasons for using computers. They've also said that election turnout would go up if there was internet elections or if there's elections by SMS, which has actually happened in England, or elections by any other mechanism. And consistently, research proves that turnout in elections does not depend on the technology used and does not depend on how easy it is to cast your vote.
Okay, we have to stop. Just a final word from me. Trying to get the word out in Germany also means approaching parties. I think this haven't been mentioned. Just recently we managed to persuade the Greens to have a basic decision on, stop voting computers. The funny thing was that the Green Party made this decision using computers. So they had actually voting computers in place deciding to get rid of voting computers. So, thanks, Rob. We have to prepare the next one.
I'll be off the stage really soon. The one thing, what I'd like to see happen in Germany is a campaign that looks a little bit like ours in terms that it has people that do nothing else, even if just for a month or just for a couple months. But you need people here that don't just do one action or don't just do one press release. But we need people in Germany, a few, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that do nothing else for a few months to see where this leads. I have no idea how to structure this, and I don't, in one way or another, propose that we can just transplant the entire Dutch campaign, because reality is much different here. But that's, I think, what's needed. So get together with other people, try to see if you have the right skill set or some subset of the right skill set. Get together, organize, because it's really important. Okay, goodbye.